So with that, let's get started. Fiona, I'll
Great.
pass it over to you.
Oh, thank you. No, this is so exciting. So, I love the fact that this conversation is even taking place. Like, I move through the corporate world and have conversations with people constantly about the weight that they're carrying and how demanding our professional lives have become, and as well our personal lives have become. And those lines are completely blurred now, in my opinion. And so you tend to carry the weight of what used to be two very differentiated parts of your life together all the time. And it's really impacting people's lives and their ability to um you know, move with more ease. And, it's never going to be easy. That's definitely never what we're ever going to say is going to happen, but there's a way to bring more ease into how we're moving through our daily lives, our professional lives, and our personal lives. And that's really what this conversation is about.
Yes, yes, that's so true. I love that differentiation you made between ease and easy. They're not the same. Well, as we're getting started, why don't you just take a moment to introduce yourself and share a little bit more about what brings you not necessarily here to this conversation, but what brings you to kind of spending time and exploring this space and this question.
Yeah. So my name is Fiona Grant Ledge. I'm a leadership advisor, a former VP of communications, having worked in incredibly high stakes environments for over 2 decades within the capital markets. And through my leadership advisory work, it's really at the intersection of communications and how we move, and how we express our leadership, if you will, and what kind of leaders that we become. And what brought me to this work was really kind of what I just reflected, was this clear need for more support outside of what is the traditional like strategy and tactics of the work that we do. I think there's a lot of focus in organizations around strategy and tactics, but there's so little focus on how we as individuals really step up, show up, move through life with, our best foot forward, and also helping individuals manage the incredibly high demand and pressure that comes particularly in these high stakes environments, which I think, most people are probably living in high stakes environments at this point in time, just because of everything going on in the world. And so I saw a real opportunity to take all of my own lived experience, having been in corporate, very quickly climbed the corporate ladder, and started out with all of the lots of joy and drive and love for my work. And then slowly over time, that just I started to disconnect from that part of myself, and was just going through the motions and just trying to keep my head above water, and continue to deliver at the same level or higher than I had before. And if only I had the support earlier on to navigate those moments, inflection points as I call them, I probably could have saved myself a lot of burnout, and really, quite frankly, getting to a point where I had to completely overhaul my life. I'm here to support people within the lives that they've already created without having to completely rewrite your story. Yeah. How about
Beautiful.
you?
Yeah, it's similar but different, right? And
Right.
I too am a leadership advisor, and it brought me to, well, the story that I'll share brought me to really considering how I wanted to lead myself differently. And so I founded my company, the Regenerative Edge. And in that, I get to work with leaders who are at an edge of change, and similar to what you were describing. But we'll go a little deeper, as we talk today about where there is an inflection point in the work that we do, right? There are different
Mhm.
differences in the work that we do and so many similarities. But working with leaders at their own edge of change and at the edge of change that we're in society, I'd say right now. And I think that for me, what this work is all about is what happens when what used to work stops working, and how do we do it differently? Where do we go from there? And again, all of this is kind of coming from my own experience, living in my own edges, my own growth edges, leadership edges, and hitting those over and over. And the last one that I hit was I decided I needed to really do things differently. And before, doing things differently meant getting a different role. It meant kind of, that traditional pivot in my career, taking on a new challenge. And talking a little bit to some of the points that you were making, there is a point when you're at that high capacity leadership role, high capacity environment, where just making a surface level change doesn't actually change anything, even though we feel like it does. And so what brought me here is that point in my own leadership when I decided I needed to stop pushing. I needed to pause. I needed to kind of take a step back and start reconnecting with what it is that I wanted, and really start to differentiate my kind of conditioning, if you will. All of the really great things that I've done in my career, I wanted to kind of celebrate that, but also know that that's not what I wanted anymore. That wasn't going to help me move forward in my career, in my purpose, and kind of it wasn't going to help me make the change that I wanted in the world. And so I had to really get honest. And what looked successful from the outside, what was fun to talk about at parties, right? What I do and the kind of work that I really cared about, I just actually didn't believe it anymore. It felt more like talking points and less like more like doing rather than being, right? I didn't feel like that Gandhi quote in a way. Like I didn't feel like I was being the change that I wanted to be in the world. I was talking about it, but I wasn't living it. And so I knew I needed to do things differently. And so really that's the work that I get to do now with leaders at the edge, is taking a step back and not necessarily pausing, stopping everything, but giving ourselves and creating space to start to reconnect and start to realign with kind of what it is that we want and our purpose and our life's work is, because that is something that is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And I think that's a new perspective that starting this business and considering, coming to this work really helped me to understand and to evolve and to expand. So really working with leaders at that moment. And they're like, what used to work just isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's come together and let's do this a little differently. And so that's kind of that essence behind the work that I do.
Yeah, I love that. You said something, so many things that struck a chord, but it's like this idea of you almost start to like perform without even realizing it's happening. I think that's where the conditioning comes in, where you're, the expectations that people have of you, your boss, your colleagues, the world, your family, and you start to just like, okay, this is what I have to do. But you've like left yourself behind is kind of how I relate to it, if you will, that like all of a sudden you're going through the motions and you find yourself here, but you've left yourself back here. And I think I think there's a lot of people that are like subconsciously going through this. I feel like it's just because it's a conversation that's really just starting to surface more and more. I think more and more people are going to recognize themselves in these types of conversations, which is why it's important that we have these conversations. But I think it's still so foreign because people aren't giving themselves the time to slow down and recognize or listen to the voice in their head, because the goal is to not get to that point where you're like, oh God, I'm so far beyond. It's to seek support before you get to that point, because there is definitely an easier way through it, and that comes to really understanding yourself, understanding how you're wired to deal with that pressure, how to better make decisions, how to better relate to people, how to and therefore how to be a better leader overall.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I couldn't agree more. And I think to that point around um, having these conversations, opening this space is, I imagine, a reason that you are doing what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? And it's a huge part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. We want to hold space for the conversation and not stop there, right? We want
Yeah.
to just hold space for that conversation. Now we want to hold a deeper space for leaders, not just to understand what's happening, but to then take different action, right? Move
Yeah.
differently. And, that idea of that voice in our heads, it's almost like this kind of work that we're talking about is getting out of our heads, right? It's
Yeah.
like getting down into our bodies. And like you were saying, like we move and we're conditioned to kind of lead from performance. We're fulfilling all of these things that we're told that we have to do, and we're doing it so well, but we've left ourselves behind. And so it's this idea of like, okay, let's drop back into ourselves and reconnect with what it is that we really want, what it
Yeah.
is that who we want to become.
That makes me wonder, and this is a little off script from what we discussed, but like maybe we can talk about some of like the tangible ways that can form for people, as opposed to like, yes, it's this idea of reconnecting with yourself, but how does that play out in the work that you do?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, if we are talking about rhythms, I think that could be a really natural way to start to pull out what is rhythm? What does it actually look like? And we could share a little bit of our perspective and kind of dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because rhythm is something that I had never associated with how I do my job. Like, I never thought in a million years I would be thinking and talking about like what is my daily rhythm or my weekly rhythm, or there's no time frame even necessarily a kind of assigned to one's own natural rhythm. But since embarking on this work and learning more about things like human design, and also just having the space to like look at how I'm moving through the world, I've
Mm.
started to realize that there is a totally natural rhythm to how I move, how I do work, how I react to things, where my energy levels are at, and or not at, quite frankly, because we all, I think, we tend to all think that everyone has the same level of output at all times. It's like, no, it actually is not. That's not the case. So when you take a step back and you start to understand what your own energetic like blueprint is, to understand, how your energy should be put into practice, so to speak, you start to understand that you do have a rhythm. You have a time when you have tons of energy, and then you have other times where you don't have as much energy, or you have more of an introspective energy, or it's always changing according to your own natural rhythm. And there are certain aspects of understanding, for example, your human design, that help to indicate like what that rhythm might look like for you. But understanding that about myself has completely changed how I work, and how I approach challenges and the goals that I'm trying to execute against. But it is absolutely different for each person, because we are all unique, and we all have, unique situations, but we also have our own unique design. How
Mm.
about you?
Well, before I respond, I'd love to learn a little bit more about so you mentioned you've learned about your kind of energy and your rhythms based on your human design. Do you bring human design as a tool into the work that you do with clients and with leaders?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a certified human design coach, and although when I first embarked on my business, that wasn't the case, but is now, and it's such an integral part to how I how I deliver value for clients, because I think it's so powerful.
Mm.
I think so often um people look outside of themselves for answers, and some people might use something like a Myers-Briggs or an Enneagram or something like that, Strength Finders, those kind, which are great tools. But the beauty about human design is you're not answering any kind of questionnaire.
Mm.
You're not using your mind to respond to something that then tells you what kind of personality type you are. It is completely based on who you are and how you're wired, basically energetically wired. And so it provides language for people that they to explain things that they probably already know about themselves, or maybe they don't. Certain aspects are more kind of subconscious, but it gives language to things that you just couldn't put your finger on. And then when you have the language, I find it just gives you so much confidence to like show up as that person. It's like I am innately wired to be a role model and to lead with my lived experience. I am so wholeheartedly stepping into that with full confidence, because I know that that's who I am, how I'm energetically wired, and how people are meant to experience me. And I think that's so transformational for people to be able to understand about themselves. So yes, I use it as a critical piece of my framework. The inflection method is really focused on understanding your human design.
Mm. That's amazing. So thinking about like rhythms and how differentiating it from routine, right? I feel so. I talk a lot about conventional leadership, and what a lot of the work that I do is shifting towards regenerative leadership, and it's offering not just a new leadership framework, but a whole new paradigm. That for me personally, it's been something that I've been studying, I've been striving to embody, to live from, but to bring into my business, right? How I design my organization, for example, let alone how I work with clients, and then kind of that paradigm shift that if they will so choose to work with me, that we work towards. And so this idea of routine, I mean, that's what we grew up with, right? It's routine, and that means rigid. That's control. That means, getting up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym, and then you eat healthy, and then you this and that. But I think this idea of rhythms is kind of like what we talked about earlier, this idea of dropping from our heads, from our conditioning, and from, structure and control and all these other things, and dropping down into ourselves, into kind of an inner knowing, deeper into our bodies of what is it, what do we need? What are we looking for? Who do we want to become? What do we, so talking a little bit about you finding rhythm and using tools like human design to just open up our language, open up our understanding, open up a connection, I think, with ourselves, rather than looking for either external validation or looking outside of us for answers. I think that just starts to illustrate the real difference of kind of where we've been, or a lot of what leaders who come to work with us bring, right? We bring our routines, and what you and I really help leaders do is start to shed some of that, some of the routines and those old ways of being, those old stories, but also we don't just leave that space. We don't just shed things, and we build new. And
Yeah.
I also use human design as a tool. So I love the way that you described that, because I think it's just such an incredible way to learn more about ourselves. And I think really for me, leadership is not about doing what we do. And that was a previous way that I looked at leadership, because that's kind of what I thought it should be, right? It was kind of how I interpreted uh, what I was seeing in leadership. It was more about what I'm doing or what I have done, right? A
Mhm.
resume and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's more about how we relate to ourselves and to others, and I'd say
Mhm.
to uncertainty, because
Oh,
we
yeah.
such an uncertain world. But I think when we can use tools like human design and we start to tap into our energy and build a rhythm and make a space for that, we can relate to ourselves and others and uncertainty in such a different way.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love that whole piece of how you relate to uncertainty. I mean, we live in such uncertain times and, there's so much change happening with, you know, the amount of like job change that people go through. Particularly, I find that like as an ambitious corporate professional, you are probably going through a lot of job change at all times. So right there in and of itself is like built-in uncertainty just as a career progresses. But then layer on top of that, like what is the future of work going to look like? And, uncertainty within your own, family space and whatnot. There's so much. And how you relate to that uncertainty, I think like the beauty of human design is that it gives you like a roadmap,
Mm.
for how you can be, no matter what, how you can be living like being trying to always put your best foot forward, if you will, because you know what your best foot is. It's not like you're not pretending, you're not doing what like you said, like you see leaders being leaders in a certain way and you're like, oh, that's how I need to be a leader. No, we're not all the same.
Yeah.
So what is your best foot forward? And the beauty also I love about human design is, it talks about strengths and weaknesses, to put it in like basic
Yeah.
corporate terminology, and it's about bringing awareness to those strengths and weaknesses so that when you start to notice the weakness showing up, you can immediately recognize that that has a corresponding strength and just flip the switch. Like it's the most like amazing tool to have at your disposal, for lack of a better way to put it, really,
Yeah.
because it's just like you can, oh, there's that weakness. Oh, I'm going to switch on the strength instead. I'm going to lean into the strength of this part of myself. And that's not performative. That's in you. Like
Right.
it's part of who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about that, I like becoming more of an observer of yourself rather than a
Mhm.
performer, right? A kind of in talking about those some of those themes that we well, one I felt right when I was leading myself, but also these themes that we're seeing in so many of the people that we get to work with. And um becoming an observer of ourselves is very interesting. And I think when we can kind of make a little space between that, because women, there's a
Mhm.
statistic like women are 80% more likely to make shame-based meaning than men. And
Oh,
we do
really?
yes, and
Yikes.
we do see starting at such a young age as girls, not just as women.
Yeah.
And when we think about that and kind of what you just described, when we can have that language of our strengths and weaknesses and know that it kind of operates at that scale. It's on a scale, it's on a spectrum, and we can start to remove some of that shame from
Mhm.
it and see it more as like, "Okay, I see this is happening. This is a pattern. This is not who I am, and I can choose differently."
Yeah.
Right? And I imagine, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a deep part of the work that we do, right?
Yeah.
That
So
deep
powerful.
that deep
Mhm.
conditioning, um, and giving leaders something new to hold on to, something new to step into, something new to kind of learn and grow with, um,
Mhm.
and to really lead differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely, and it's not another tool, it's not another tactic, it's not another script. It's
Yeah,
literally just like how you're innately wired to be and trusting that, just really trusting. And you know it you feel it inside you when you learn it about yourself. So therefore it's so much easier to trust, but it's oftentimes, and I remember being in this place where I was navigating an incredibly demanding role, and the pressure of it was crushing me. And I mean, gosh, I look back on some of those things now and I go, if only I knew my human design back then, I would have had like so much more composure and candor, which are two of my main kind of things, strengths, if you will. But at the time, I was definitely leaning into the weaknesses, and it landed very poorly. And if only I'd known then, I would have been able to better navigate those conversations. But also, I was like looking for help. I was looking for a coach because I was like, I need to, play the game and like, be better at politics and all that stuff. And that would have been such a weight. I mean, I ended up not finding anybody because I think it's hard to find good mentors, good support, which luckily there are a lot of us out there, but it's still hard to find those people. But if I had gone down that path where I was like, learning how to play the political game, I would have wasted my time because it would have just been more performance,
Yeah.
But it would have been so helpful to have, like, I wish I'd known you. I would have called you out for support.
Anytime. Oh, but that's such a good point. I mean, and we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but just that idea of when you hit an inflection point or an edge in your leadership, there are lots of options out there. And what would you recommend someone looks for when they're saying, okay, I've hit an inflection point? Where do I go? What do I look for? What are keywords that I can start searching for to kind of find someone who does that deeper work with leaders?
Yeah. I mean, we are so spoiled, right? Even like compared to like 2 years ago, when I was still in corporate, the fact that we have so many engines at our fingertips in terms of, search and utilizing social media, there's a lot, and there's been an increase in mentors, leadership advisors, coaches coming on the scene with this exact purpose. So looking for leadership development or personal development, those kinds of kind of main keywords. But then it's also about coming here onto Substack. There's a lot of thought leaders, speaking to what they are experts in on Substack. So finding people through Substack, through, your own personal networks. And it really comes down to, for me, this isn't about performance. And I think that's where a real difference exists in terms of the way that a lot of coaching is positioned, that I had seen previously be positioned. It was all about performing better. This isn't about performance. I'm not here to coach you into, performing and getting the gold star. Like it's more of an internal understanding of yourself, and within that finding peace and ease and grounded confidence, and then leading from that place and working from that place. And I truly believe that is how you change organizations as well, is that by demonstrating and leading by design, but also modeling the behavior, right?
Yeah.
And I'm excited for the future because there's so many of us out there carrying the torch for
Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to this idea of rhythms again, and thinking about what does it actually look like to kind of follow your own rhythm, especially when we're still living in this world where they don't support that. We're in that performance, competitive, capitalistic, corporate environments where it's not designed to support individual rhythms or even team rhythms necessarily or organizational rhythms. So what does that look like? I wonder if we could just
Yeah.
hack that a little bit. But how well,
Why don't you go? You go
I
first.
was going to ask, well, how about this? I'll share when I think of rhythms, I mentioned earlier the difference between routine and rhythm, but for me, rhythm comes down to three things. It's movement, it's motion. And so when we can find a rhythm, it keeps us in motion so we don't get stuck. And there's a difference between being in a loop and a rhythm, right? And so one, even though, oftentimes they look like a circle, but a rhythm isn't necessarily just a circle, and it doesn't always look like a cycle, even though it can. But I think the core part of it is there's movement and motion. And I also think the next piece is it's kind of grounded in our connection to ourselves, what we want, our purpose, our life's work, however you might define that, but it's unique. It's unique to us. It is our own rhythm. And the third thing that I'd say when I think about rhythm, it is about kind of accepting our humanness, our vulnerability, kind of it is part of Mother Nature. And I think, and the reason why I came to that particular point, it feels like really deep, but it's because that it starts to help us grasp the difference between like a routine and a behavior and a rhythm. And knowing that we're connected, we're all connected and we're interconnected and we're part of a bigger system. And so it gives us space to own our own rhythms and understand that we're vulnerable. We can't stay in one place for forever. And I'll share a quick story of when I thought it was all about performance. All right, for me, it was okay. Perform means to produce. Produce means to show up. And to show up means to, always deliver. And so it was just kind of this constant output. My energy was always in the output, and I didn't give myself space to go inward. And I think there is a vulnerability, an accepting of a vulnerability in that when we allow ourselves to go inward. And that's not something we talk about as leaders very often. And it's not part of, I think, the conversation, right? And when we talk about leadership. And so for me, rhythm really comes down to those three things.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, it's so interesting because what it's basically stepping off of that, especially the last point, is like rhythm is at the ultimate outcome of understanding your rhythm is having grace for yourself.
Yes.
And also therefore having grace and compassion for others, because you recognize that everyone has their own rhythm, right? Everyone has their own way of being, of who they are. And we often forget that. And I find, tying it back to human design, learning about human design gives you so much compassion for other people because you recognize that everybody has their own. And as it relates to rhythm, I mean, it's if we're gonna, let's tie it back to something corporate, like you have goals, you have deliverables that you have to deliver on, and it's a mountain, right? Well, we take those, we break them down into small, next right actions, if you will, and then you map it to your design. You understand that you've got a big push because you have a big project that you have to deliver on in, like, say 4 weeks. And you're like, okay, I've got 4 weeks. What I understand about myself, what I have going on during those 4 weeks, this is how my rhythm should be. Week
Mm,
1, XYZ, week 2, and maybe it's not per week, maybe it's days or who knows. I think a lot for women, this tends to tie in as well to cycle, which is helpful because it gives you like a barometer or an anchor, if you will, oftentimes in terms of understanding rhythm. But this applies really to anybody. As long as you know your human design, you can understand your activation sequence, and that gives you a map for your rhythm. And so I understand about myself that I love being out there, but I also need to retreat. And
yeah.
if I don't get the retreat, then I override myself and I'm now just pushing through.
Mhm.
And that's where things start to happen, like resentment, burnout, exhaustion, like those kinds of things, especially when you're doing it again and again and again. So, about understanding this about myself, now I used to think, but I'm an extrovert. I'm actually like, what is an extrovert? I don't even know what that is anymore. Now I understand about myself that I need to retreat. And so therefore I give myself the space and the grace to retreat, particularly after I've done a big push. So I understand that rhythm about myself, that I can definitely lean in and push when I need to, because we all have to deliver often on things.
Yeah.
But being able to retreat after the big push, or even if, okay, you work in an organization and you have a deliverable and you can't change that date and it doesn't map to your rhythm, find micro moments
Mm.
within your timeline to delivery where you can where you can find your own rhythm, whether that's in your personal life. Maybe when you leave the office, you're applying what you know about your rhythm to give yourself that space that you need in order to, because it's not a cycle, it's definitely more like a wave, and sometimes it's choppier than others,
Yeah.
right? So it's all, I think it all comes back to grace and giving yourself the grace to own your own rhythm.
Yes. And thinking about what does that look like? It's boundaries. And you can't
Yeah.
set boundaries unless you start to know them. And people will push things and people will push up against them. Okay, then how do you respond to that rather than react to that? How do you start to recognize what's happening when you need to give yourself more grace? Or when,
Mhm.
hey, actually, I think I think it actually is time for me to, you know, move from that rest period. And last time I needed 3 days, and now I only have one. But I think it's, what does that really look like? That kind of comes back to that knowing of ourselves, right? And
Mhm.
we have to start somewhere. We
Yeah.
have to start somewhere, and rhythms are like, if like you were saying, they're not these perfect circles. They're waves. There's ups and downs, and they can be highs and lows, and it's often kind of looks messy and things get unfinished, and it's that idea of kind of acceptance. That's okay. That's
Yeah.
absolutely okay. Our rhythms aren't meant to be these perfect cycles where everything is finished and done and has a bow. It's just part of kind of living our life, and choosing
Mhm.
to not live from this constant sense of urgency, and
Yes.
really choosing, deciding to intentionally to live from our wholeness, from our truth, from what it is that we need. And often, that doesn't always mean that I'm not saying selfish. I'm saying it's like, okay, let's look and consider ourselves in relation to what is being asked, in relation to what's happening around me, and what's in relation to things that other people need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where the real power is at the end of the day. You want to take back control of your life, go within. Go within and don't wait for anybody else to give you permission. Don't wait for anybody else to give you the structure that you need, because at the end of the day, organizations are not built around the human experience.
No, no.
Like, unfortunately, it's true, even though we're all humans working inside these organizations, but they're not really built to any kind of rhythm. They're built for maximum output at all times and growth at all costs, really,
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And that is what it is. I think that will change over time, but for now, this is where we are. So doing this kind of work and working with mentors like you and me, that's really where you take back control and you give yourself the power to live within the life that you've created, but with more grace and ease.
Oof. Well, I think with that, we can start to bring this conversation to a close, because I can keep.
We could talk for hours.
You just touched on. Ooh, I'd love to talk about that. So maybe, but I think really what we're getting at is there is a cost for not finding your own rhythm. There's a cost for not choosing to lead yourself differently. There are costs to all of these things. And we just have to decide, where is it that we want to or choose to put our time and our energy? And do we want to make a decision to lead differently as we move forward, to lead what's next? Maybe it's the point that you were just making, Fiona, about something, organizations of the future. But at the end of the day, choosing yourself, you never really lose. But I think a point that you and I both were making throughout this is we can't really do this kind of work alone.
Yeah.
We've been taught and conditioned and told that we can do everything on our own. Right? And that was a trap that I found myself in. And it wasn't until I sought mentors and a coach and someone to help me grow and to hold me accountable, but also to guide me along this kind of messy middle of being at my own growth edge. And so I think, is there anything else you want to add about some of these main points that we've been talking about today?
Oh gosh, I think we've said it. We've said so much. I mean, and you just summarized it. Just kind of what you just said is we didn't grow up navigating school on our own. We had a teacher. We had a teacher's assistant most of the time too.
Right.
We had tutors. We had our parents. All helping us learn and grow. And why don't we give ourselves that same grace once we go into corporate life and into the professional world? It's so few the people that actually ask for help, because asking for help is like demonstrating vulnerability, right? It's demonstrating that you don't have all the answers. And we've been taught that we need to have all the answers because otherwise somebody else is going to have them and take your job, basically.
Yeah, right. We see it as a threat. And there was actually a study I was just reading that looked at this. Men and women leaders in senior roles see asking for help as being vulnerable, therefore not being a good leader. And we all we know intuitively that it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite. So there's another topic that we could probably.
I know we could keep going. We should probably land this plane.
Where can they learn more about you? How can people go to find more about you and possibly work with you?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thanks for asking. So I offer a complimentary inflection session, which is an opportunity to give you space to sit down and just talk about these kinds of things and see what it is that's kind of holding you back or that's weighing on you, and how you might be able to flip that switch and move past it and move through it. It's called an inflection session. You can book one at theinflectionmethod.com/session. And you get a full personalized human design report for added integration along with booking the session.
Amazing. All right.
How about you?
For me, I have just started writing more about this on Substack, which is one of the reasons why we're here. And so you can subscribe to Edge of Change Leadership for free, just to learn a little bit more, gain a little bit more context and language. But if you'd like, you can even join the First Edge, which is more of an interactive experience on Substack where there's conversation, and we really just start to work together and navigate your edge together. This threshold actually is what I call it. And you can find me on Substack at meganbcraig.com. meganbcraig.com or on my website at meganbcraig.com. I'm getting it all mixed up, but you all can find me, Megan B. Craig. But with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. And we hope to see you again in future conversations. Don't forget to drop a comment about what you learned, maybe new insights, but we'd love to hear from you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for hosting.
Bye, everyone.